Okay, today we're here with Father Perricone. Father Perricone, welcome, Spiritual Strength. Good to see
Thank
you.
you very much, Gene. Nice to be on with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was the last time I saw you. You presided over my friend Dom and Nicole's wedding. It was a beautiful wedding, unbelievable. I just thought the sermon was top notch. And my friend David and I were sitting next to each other, and David looks over at me. He said, "He's at master level," and I said, "I know for sure." But many years doing it, a God given gift, but also work and preparation. So we're all real appreciative of the things you do, Father. So thank you for
Thank
all
you
that.
very much, Gene. I appreciate that.
What how do you prepare for your sermons? Because I know you've touched many people's hearts, not just intellectually, and we could get to that, but helping people's hearts become more on fire for Christ. How do you prepare for your sermons?
I suppose practice makes perfect. After 50 years, I might have gotten it right. Um, I suppose my preparation for my sermons is in my weekly study, and which covers a various number of subjects. And I'm always with a pencil and notebook. And if an idea comes into my mind that I can develop into a sermon, considering either the feast that's coming up or a particular topical event or the gospel, I jot it down. And then by the end of the week, I will compile the sermon. And always being sure that if it's a sermon, it's no more than 8 to 10 minutes. And that will mean a certain compression. And it will mean having to write down certain key thoughts. Usually I do them in prose, in outline form, so that I'm able to include the substance of what I want to say, but yet editing it so people are understanding what I'm talking about, and you're not dwelling on it all that much. Because I think every priest must recall that when he preaches a sermon, he's not delivering a dissertation or a lecture. Those are two different modalities, and that's important to keep in mind. The brevity is very important. And when I have that outline before me, I spend the day before the delivery of the sermon memorizing it, and then delivery becomes easier on the day it has to be delivered. And when I'm doing other formats such as conferences and retreats or lectures from in a classroom, the methodology is completely different. I'm able to consult notes, and it's more freewheeling. But the sermon is like a compact jewel that I want to hand to people so that they'll remember. The brevity is important. Of course, brevity is difficult. You might recall that famous letter that Dr. Johnson sent to his friend in London in the 17th century. And at the very head of the letter, he said, "I apologize for writing such a long letter because I did not have time to write a short one." It takes time to perfect brevity. And that's essentially. And then when I'm going over the sermon for the last times, there might be references that I decide to include, and I will include them only if they fit into that window of 8 to 10 minutes.
So are you thinking there's one point I'm trying to get across? I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
There is a general topic that I want to cover. Sometimes within that topic there'll be maybe subtopics, maybe 3 or 4, and I oftentimes will announce that there are 3 subjects I want to cover here in the time I have allotted to me, and then I try to elaborate. I think it's very important that you try to delight the audience. I remember St. Augustine saying that there are 3 elements to any delivery of any sermon: docere, flectare, delectare. That means that the priest has virtual to docere, to teach doctrine. Movere, he is, through his words, he wants to move the wills of those who are listening to him. And delectare means, Augustine made a point of this, that he has to delight his audience. He has to have them sitting on the edges of their seats for every word. So the delight of the entire package will allow the audience to leave remembering what he said. So I try to keep that monotem from St. Augustine in mind. That's probably too much.
No, no, that's great. And thinking about how there's the pause, there's the taking your time with it, as opposed to just I need to dump all this information, because I'm sure even as you're saying it, there's probably 50 other things you could say on top of it, but it's having that discipline to, this is the point I'm making. And then I guess the pause is very important. I feel like as a speaker, I see you make very good use of the pauses that I don't. What do you tell yourself there, and how do you improve with that to let them digest this?
That's right. The pausing extremely important in rhetoric. And not that every priest has to study rhetoric, but it does help. And it comes almost instinctively, Gene. You recognize when you have delivered a particular sentence or a particular thought, and you need for it to have an impact. It's important that you stop, so that it can filter into the mind of the audience. I suppose that's never planned on my part. I suspect that as a priest preaches more and more, he develops that skill of pause and voice inflection, speed, comfort at the pulpit or the preaching podium. He must never appear stiff. He must appear friendly. His delivery has to be inviting. It can't be threatening. And yet he can't be theatrical.
Right. And that's a key. Yes, and that's a key, because whereas I know you do appear approachable and friendly, but it's not like a clown friendly, which unfortunately you see priests, and not saying any of them are clowns, but it's just they might, they're trying too hard maybe to make that relation, right?
Precisely. And they step over a certain line, which becomes comedic rather than dramatic.
And priestly, carrying with a certain dignity.
Of course, the perfect example of preaching is Fulton Sheen. I mean, he is my mentor, and watching him as a young boy and continuing to watch him today, I'm amazed by his oratorical technique. It's never affected. It's never stilted. It's certainly never theatrical, but it is dramatic, Gene. And there's no problem with drama when it comes from sincerity of delivery. In fact, it's essential.
Sure. And did you study? You said it's not essential for priests to study rhetoric. Did you study rhetoric? Were you reading Aristotle and Cicero and these guys, or
all of them,
newer people?
all
really?
The new ones I don't like. I'm pretty much an ancient person and medieval. Yes, you're right. It would be Aristotle's treatises on rhetoric. It would be Cicero's, especially Cicero. He's a little bit more more practical in his treatises on rhetoric, and I think it would serve well every priest to look at Cicero's treatises on rhetoric. He is he was the finest orator in the ancient Roman Empire, outside of St. Augustine, perhaps, but. And remember, he was delivering these masterful speeches before the Roman Senate. And to this day, when education used to be what it was supposed to be before 1965, in many Catholic high schools worthy of the name, by fourth year Latin, students were having to deliver Cicero's orations before the Roman Senate by memory.
And do you feel like that?
Classical education was.
And you feel like that's important to because it's not acting, but in a sense it is. You're I guess. How do you view?
Yes, yeah. You in a certain sense, it is acting. Again, Fulton Sheen being the model.
Right.
When we look at him, we don't say, "Oh, he's an actor," but yet he is acting. And he's using all those Ciceronian techniques in order to do one important thing: put across the message of Holy Mother Church and the salvific message of our Lord Jesus Christ crucified. And if drama can do that, and it did for Sheen, then every priest has to be dramatic as Sheen was. But in being dramatic, he can't be affected. He can't be fake. He can't be a performer. He has to be first and foremost a priest. And that's why Sheen is the most important example here. I keep on referring to him like a broken record. Priests are not learning how to preach in seminaries today, except in a very few, whose name I will not mention because I've been told that when I bragged about, in my writing about certain seminaries, they got in trouble. So I don't do that anymore. But in seminaries where they are taught properly, they are they come to understand through someone like Sheen how it is that they should preach. And of course, the best way for a young seminarian to learn how to preach is to listen to good preaching. So you begin with Fulton Sheen, and then you imitate him, try to imitate him. Of course, making his example your own example. And then you're listening to, if you're in a very good seminary, there will be good professors who are preaching. And you take, like a bee does pollen from flower to flower, the best of what you hear, so that you could bring the best to your preaching in your pulpit.
Right. And then there's that fingerprint that you put on your like, that's your signature. Not that, obviously all glory to God, but there's working with the gifts that you've been given and your temperament then, because you couldn't be Fulton Sheen. In fact, it'd be a sin to be Fulton Sheen because you're you, right? So how do you...
And it would be fake, Gene, wouldn't it?
Right.
It would be fake, and it would be theft. No, we take Fulton Sheen's example and work it through God's grace to your own personality, and then do the presentation. But what you want to do in imitating Sheen is to have an effective communication of the teaching of the Church, so that it dramatically imprints itself on those who hear you. So they go away saying some of the lines over and over in their mind and making resolutions. That's the important thing.
Right. This is just such a great topic, because I've listened to a lot of Catholic podcasts over the years, and I haven't really heard anyone really talk about preaching much in this much depth. So I think it is very helpful. Are there any other resources that you would recommend? Who are some other good people, maybe people can watch now, that does an effective job of speaking? I mean, of course, there could be good speakers that you don't necessarily agree with what they speak about, right? But they might be effective communicators. And then there might be people who are more that total package that are bringing that together a little bit better.
I think one of them, there aren't too many these days, Gene, but one of them would be my dear friend, Father McTague, who has, as you do, a regular radio station 3 times a week. He is a superlative preacher, and I think it would be well for he's not on television, or he doesn't have a podcast, but he's a radio broadcaster. A priest would have a lot to learn from someone as good as he. My dear friend, who again has to have a podcast, so you can't watch him, but Father Matthew Kauth, who was the rector of the Seminary of St. Joseph's in Diocese of Charlotte, North Carolina, is an outstanding preacher. A young man would do well to listen to someone like him. I don't listen to podcasts at all, Gene, so I don't know who's out there, and there may be people out there that I could recommend, but I can't see any, not because they're not there, but because I don't know about them.
Yeah, and this might be a good transition as we go into your catechesis, but I think just one other point on the preaching, that you said you have to have clear thinking. So to have clear thinking, you need to understand the Church's teachings. Before you communicate, you have to understand it clearly. Right. And I think there's, of course, a lot of confusion with that. And I just feel like also, so that's one thing, the confusion and being able to keep your head straight, absorbing the right information. And the other aspect is, I think sometimes maybe there's maybe some fortitude lacking, possibly, because it seems like what I've heard from a lot of preaching is the priests leading with the exceptions, maybe to the rules, and then it gets cloudy, as opposed to, we'll start with what is the main rule. Like, let's say something like there's no salvation outside of the church. And right away, a priest might think, and I understand this, well, we don't want people to think they're going to go to hell, definitely, if they're not a Catholic. It's like, well, we know that, but you don't want to give people the impression that, well, it doesn't matter what religion you are. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of Catholics take from it. It just is so watered down in the delivery that they don't have the teaching straight. So can you speak about that a little bit?
A subject like that is very, very difficult to treat in the ambit of an 8 to 10-minute sermon.
Right.
Precisely because of what you say, Gene. This is such a nuanced teaching of Mother Church, nulla ecclesia, extra ecclesia nulla salus. And if a priest tries to broach that subject, he's going to, it will inevitably result in him missing something from the doctrine, and therefore people leaving with a truncated understanding, which is dangerous. So it's better for a priest not to confront a very volatile subject like that, and in the course of a sermon, not shy away from subjects that are controversial, especially today when he needs to, because the Catholic faithful are starved for solid doctrine, especially in the context of the confusion that's coming out of the highest places. So he has to confront, but that confrontation in the context of a sermon has to be very careful, because he has to recall that he does only have 8 to 10 minutes. And it's very hard to settle a controversy, a theological controversy, in that amount of time and give the Catholic all that they need. But yet he has to do it. So he has to figure out when he's writing, how will I confront this subject? Give just enough so there's a proper understanding, but not give too much that he doesn't go on and on in a context that's only proper to a lecture.
Right. I think the same thing with the woman serving her, the wife serving her husband. I mean, of course, there's an equal dignity, and it's a fact that we're all created in the image and likeness of God. But but God also created hierarchically. We obey Him. The wife obeys the husband, and and the authority structure is made for the person who is under authority. I mean, the person who has authority is held in much higher accountability before God, of course. So I'd assume that's got to be a tough one, as I'm sure a number of other topics are.
Yes, in the end, anytime you want to speak about the teaching of the church, it's always going to involve, especially in the present moment, is always going to involve having to encounter certain erroneous ideas that are spreading in the church like an infection. And a priest has 10 minutes to try to rectify that as best he possibly can by giving the meat of sacred doctrine to them. And if he has studied his St. Thomas Aquinas enough, he will have succinct, direct answers in the course of his sermon that will leave the Catholic faithful satisfied with having been fed with Catholic doctrine.
Which is a pastoral thing. I mean, truth, doctrine, and being pastoral, they go hand in hand, don't they? Right? It shouldn't be one of the clarity and brevity are both charitable. That's charity.
That's right. And since 1965, many Catholic priests have thought that to be pastoral means that somehow we are trimming or truncating the Catholic message. Or making it more palatable to the audience. This is not what pastoral means. Pastoral means taking care of the sheep. The pastor is the shepherd. And taking care of the sheep doesn't mean that you dilute the food that the sheep need. It means you give them the right food. Remember the First Vatican Council in its declaration on divine revelation was called Pastor Aeternos, the eternal pastor. And the whole essence of that document of the First Vatican Council was to stress the firmness of Catholic truth and the courage that is necessary to give the truth, whether the audience likes to hear it or not. That's being pastoral. Being pastoral means to give the faithful the truth in all its glory and all its beauty, and yet in all its toughness. That's pastoral.
And at the same time, if you feel like you've been misunderstood, it'd be nice to clarify that, of course.
Yes. Yes.
So, and I guess that leads into your catechism classes where you teach about theology, and there's a lot of philosophy too. I know I've attended several of them, not as many as I like, because that was right when I started going over there right when I got married. I'd love to have more time to shoot over there. I'm sure, but I know there's married people who go there. That's really no excuse, and you do it in several locations. You speak about St. Thomas. I know you recommended this Baltimore Catechism 3.
That's right.
Which I went on to get to talk about what you do there and how you teach and the resources that you use.
Okay, I began these catechism lectures, I suppose, about 8 years ago. And they have proliferated into different locations. And my purpose was, well, my understanding was that Catholics had not been fed the Catholic doctrine for 60 years. There was this tremendous dearth, this desert that existed. And I knew that I had to teach it to them. And I knew that the Baltimore Catechism would be the finest compendium of the Church's infallible teachings that is easily understandable to the ordinary Catholic. Now, I simply do not go through each question and answer and leave it at that. What I do is to take each question and then give each and every question I consider to be like an iceberg. The question and answer that's on the page is the very tip. But I want to go deeply. Most of the iceberg is underneath the water, cannot be seen. And that is my opportunity to introduce St. Thomas Aquinas to these classes. But I have to be careful to spoon feed him to these classes. Because even though I might be dealing with a group of exceptionally educated Catholics, I cannot assume that they understand all the angelic doctrine. It's very difficult. And so I spend an awful lot of time unpacking St. Thomas for them, making sure they go out with a clarity of mind and certitude that allows them to talk about this to their friends who are in desperate need of understanding. This will also allow me to introduce other authors, and there's no end of those that I want to talk about. To give Catholics understanding that the Catholic Church did not begin in 1970.
Right.
This is what ordinarily, typically, modern priests would like them to think. There's 2,000 years of the world's greatest scholars, the greatest saints, contributing to us understanding the Catholic faith the way we should. And this is my opportunity to introduce Catholics to those, not only saints, but in the past 100 years, some of the finest Catholic philosophers and theologians. So I look upon these catechism lectures as a beginning course in Catholic doctrine for any Catholic who comes along, whether they have their doctorate or if they have no education, even in a higher education. But my opportunity to help them rediscover the riches of the Catholic faith. So they have something to hold on to. They have something with which to speak to their friends and family about. I'm now giving those classes in 3 different locations. The one I think you attended to was in South River. Another one in Jersey City where I say the Latin Mass every Sunday. And the final one in Bayside, Queens, at St. Joseph. That's the Trinity Mass Center. They're very well attended. Sometimes the numbers fluctuate. That's the nature of these things. But I very much enjoy them. And I enjoy delivering them. And I hope the people enjoy them.
Yeah, and I think it's a breath of fresh air. I know for me it was a breath of fresh air hearing you teach, because it's the way CCD was growing up. It's first of all just being not as clear. Like they're maybe I'm sure very well intentioned with the way they write these different books, but it's kind of flowery. You're not getting, okay, what is it that I believe? And that question and answer format is very helpful, especially in the early stages of just, okay, this is what I believe, and then build on top of that. It seems like a lot of, maybe the newer theologians, right, in the 20th century, the Benedict and JP2 and Balthazar and de Lubac, these guys cut their teeth on St. Thomas and the manualists and the catechisms. And then maybe, I don't know if it was them or their students, where maybe they were teaching it slightly differently than maybe it was presented to them. And maybe there was a better way they could start with what was, give everyone that solid background, and then like flower it out from there. Whereas I thought we got the flowered out version right away, and then your head's spinning. What exactly do we believe? I mean, what are your thoughts on all of that? I know I threw a lot at you.
You did. You kind of opened up a hornet's nest there. Where do I begin? You mentioned people like von Balthasar and Henri de Lubac. Who are troublesome. Why are they troublesome? Because they mounted a campaign beginning in the 1940s to suppress St. Thomas Aquinas. This was very, very good. Very good. They wanted you to do something which is called the Nouvelle Théologie, or they called it the New Theology. And they thought that the manner of teaching, as it had been embraced by the Church up until that time, teaching through the Catechism. The Catechism takes its birth at the Council of Trent. And the Church recognized that you have to begin, as you pointed out, Gene, with giving the staples of the faith, and you build on from there. But these theologians, decided that was too restrictive. That the theologians had to be more creative, and they really thought that St. Thomas Aquinas was a straitjacket, and they rejected him. And now they had been schooled and reared in St. Thomas Aquinas, so they had that strength and muscularity of mind, but they wanted to reject it. And what happened is that others took the baton from them and went in even more radical directions. So by the time that you were in a CCD program, you were very young, this full flowering of the rejection of St. Thomas and the rejection of the Catechism was in full gallop. And from the time of around 1968, Roman Catechism was forbidden to be taught in Catholic schools. And as a consequence, we
forbidden, or just they stopped using, or it was forbidden?
Forbidden.
Wow.
I know many priests were called into the chancellor office because they were teaching the Baltimore Catechism.
Huh.
So, in its place was this kind of free-floating, airy, stream of consciousness idea about what faith is. It's a very, very long story. But de Lubac and Hans von Balthasar did introduce that. I wrote an article once, a few years ago, Aquinas Anyone, and I quoted these people as saying, we must put behind us St. Thomas Aquinas. Anytime a Catholic says that, they're headed off the edge of a cliff. Because St. Thomas Aquinas has been declared by the Church to be her common doctrine. Meaning, he is the one that teaches the Catholic faith par excellence to all the generations till Christ comes again in glory. And to depart from him is to depart from Catholic orthodoxy. And you are then entering into lands that are fraught with all kinds of peril. And we have seen that. We have generations and generations of Catholics who do not know what the faith is because they were adopting this new theology of these gentlemen. Every year, for instance, in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, for the past 40 years, there is what is called their catechetical convention. Thousands attended from all over the country. And there, for the past 40 years, they've been instructing catechists that are in every diocese throughout the country that they are to give children this free-floating, kind of politicized religion that simply goes from one woke ideology to another. And this catechetical conference in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles in spite of the fact of its Archbishop, who's a member of Opus Dei and should know better, continues to allow this mess, this propaganda mess, to continue. And so I would say 90% of the schools that are teaching children nothing, because they are still attending these conferences, these workshops, where they are being filled with this tremendous bias against the catechism. And we see the results. How else could you explain this so-called retreat occurring in Rome as you and I speak, that is filled with nothing but a carnival atmosphere? Grown cardinals singing songs as though they were on some kind of comedy program. This is a complete bastardization of our Holy Catholic faith. It's happening as we speak in Rome at this moment. How does one explain that? Well, one explains it because there's been no teaching of authentic Catholic doctrine. So, aside from someone like you who's had the fortune of somehow compensating for that lack, Catholics will see what's going on in Rome tonight and say, I guess this is the Catholic faith. It makes no demands upon me. There's really nothing we have to believe for certain. Everything is up in the air. As one high-ranking prelate said a few weeks ago, all religions lead you to God. And if that's the case, why should I be a Catholic? Or why should I be a good Catholic? Or why should I follow any of the commandments?
Yeah.
Someone at the highest level says that. Yeah.
Well, it's again, it's a tricky thing, because you do want to open up your arms to the world, but at the same time, you can't be confused. You don't want it to be mistaken. Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and there's no way to salvation except through Him, and that's through His body, the Church. Christ is the head, the Church is the body. So
great missionaries who did that, like Francis Xavier and Isaac Job, but they never compromised the faith.
Right. So it's you want to bring people in, so it's a difficult thing there, because you have to be a certain way, and sometimes you're going to offend certain people. And I guess if you're trying the best you can, number one, you're telling the truth in a charitable way, and you're doing the best you can to present it in a digestible way to other people. You can't really feel bad if they persecuted me, they'll persecute you, right?
Right. You can't go out of your way, however, as a priest or as layman, to offend anyone, because as you properly say it, we have to tell the truth in charity. We don't go, and a priest from the pulpit should never go out of his way to offend anyone. He does have to say true things in a true way. And on the other hand, he can't be saying things that are put in a way that invites discipline from certain authorities. He has to couch his words carefully, express them tactfully.
Right.
The context, because the pulpit is not the time to set out red meat for Catholics to hold on to and then start writing down. He has to confront error, but he has to confront error thoughtfully.
Yeah. And especially when people are there will be people who are looking to misquote you, and both people on the right and the left who are trying to get you. Got to be you want to be responsible to the best of your ability with that. One of the other things I saw with Catechesis, now we're talking about that, I think about, we work with a lot of wrestlers, and a lot of the top wrestling teams are Catholic schools. And I asked them, what are they studying as seniors in high school? And a lot of them at this point, they're studying world religion. So I'm thinking, oh, that's just great. We're going to open up the kids' minds to world religion right before we feed them to the wolves and they go out into college, where not only is it a free-for-all with decrepit morality, of course, but also just ideas that are just now directly antithetical to the Church.
It's like equipping equipping soldiers going into the war, with saltwater taffy. Not going to work.
Right before.
What does a young Catholic need to know about world religions? A young Catholic, as a senior, needs to know how to defend the Holy Catholic faith. First of all, to know what the Catholic faith is, and then to have the tools to be able to defend that faith. And that involves a lot of hard work, and knowing about world religions is not going to help him at all to either save his soul or save the souls of others, and as you probably say, to embrace the world for Christ.
Yeah. So if anything, that's, yeah, but like you said, it starts the two things. Before you even are able to defend the faith, even somewhat eloquently, you got to know what the faith is.
Of course you do. Of course you do. And that
So what-
takes the hard work of study, Gene, and
Yeah.
proper study, and studying the right people, beginning with St. Thomas Aquinas, and if one is not skilled enough to read him directly, to read the dozens upon dozens of men who did understand him and who can make him palatable and spoon feed him to the Catholics who need to understand him. I'm talking about someone like Frank Sheen,
Yeah.
someone like Monsignor Ronald Dobbs, G.K. Chesterton, Father Gadagudo Grange, Peter Kreeft, my friend Dr. Ralph McInerney, and I could go on and on with these marvelous top-shelf authors who could give Catholics St. Thomas Aquinas in a manner which they could understand. I don't want Catholics to go to the Summa Theologiae. After the first page, they'll find him indigestible and never go back again. Now, they can't go to the theologian. They have to go to these reliable interpreters of St. Thomas Aquinas. And that's what our high school and college Catholic students were receiving up until 1965. And so they were able to go out and defend the faith because they understood it to the core of their bones. They had been inculcated into them through 4 years of high school and 4 years of college. You should take a look, Gene, at the college textbooks that were given to collegians in Catholic universities and colleges up until 1965. They were learning more theology and philosophy than the fellows in our seminaries today.
I'm sure. If you're, oh, I believe it. Yeah, I believe it. It's because if you're getting those classical liberal arts at a younger age, your mind is already making these connections, and like you said, they're getting the theology. I know one of the things you recommended to me that was to go through the Baltimore Catechism 3, this version in particular, Father Connell, and just ask.
The edition is very, very good.
And you said go back and forth. You were telling me and David, just ask each other the questions in the back and forth.
Exactly.
Right.
It wouldn't hurt, Gene, for all the men your age to begin memorizing the answers.
Right.
Someone as ancient as I, when I was in Catholic grammar school, that entire Baltimore Catechism would have been memorized by the time we graduated in 8th grade. The entire thing would be memorized.
Wow.
So that if you go to someone my age and say, by the way, what is a sacrament? And immediately, let's say a sacrament is an outward institute by Christ to give grace. Oh.
Right. Whereas when we don't even know the basics. I mean, Baltimore Catechism 1, first question. You have people in 8th grade, freshman year of high school, who've either been just got confirmed, or they're about to be confirmed, and they're asking, "What's the purpose of life? Why are we here? What's it all about?" It's like, this is the first question.
First question of the Baltimore Catechism.
Right, and how important it is, and then how bad it is, Father, and not edifying to anyone that's around when someone asks this question in the class as a wise guy, and there's not at least you're at a public, if someone's at a public school, there should be at least 5-7 people who are saying, well, this is the answer. And now you feel more fortified in your faith as opposed to everyone's looking around. I don't know, to be happy, my family, I want to, get a good job one day, these kind of things.
That's right. We're in
sad
a situation, Gene.
All right, so here's a selfish question then, okay? I think I have 3 young kids, 5, 4, and 2, and my brother has 5 kids. What would you, if you were to write their curriculum for catechesis and just in general, what would it be from a young age on up?
Well, you start teaching a child at age 5, that would be when the time they would enter a Catholic school, the the First Communion Baltimore Catechism,
Right.
a separate little book, and it's filtered to the understanding of 6 and 7-year-olds, so they're be properly trained to receive the sacrament of Holy Communion and the sacrament of confession. And then there's that intermediate Baltimore Catechism 2 that they would graduate to. And then finally, the number 3, the Father Cannell's Confraternity Edition. I would suggest that to any Catholic parent, to put that into their hands. In the meantime, if they're younger, if the age may be 3 or 4, start reading them the lives of the saints. This is an excellent preparation for Catholic doctrine, because what you're doing is exciting them
Right.
with saints and the lives of real people who lived perfectly the example of our Lord. And it demonstrates that they can do the same thing. You talk to them about the martyrs, especially young boys will resonate with the martyrs, especially the early martyrs. The girls, you tell them about St. Lucy and St. Agatha and St. Cecilia, St. Agnes. These are little girls, their age, maybe a little bit older than 5, 6, and 7. But they recognize that these young children lived the life of Christ so deeply they're willing to give up their lives for it. It especially resonates with young boys. And then you begin to give them the doctrine and tell them that, yes, these are the truths for which these young children were willing to die. And you have to learn them now. So that would be the method of instruction I would say to you, your brother, or any young father and mother. That's
When
all that's necessary.
when should they be starting that like the number 3? Is that like a 6th grade? Is that an 8th grade? Is that high school?
That would always begun in the 6th grade.
Okay.
That would always be begun in the 6th. And then at 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, by the end of the 8th grade, it would be mastered. It would be completely memorized. And totally understood. You'll get a kick, Gene, out of the Father Connell has with questions for discussion at the end of each one of those lessons, where he asks questions about Zebedee had this problem with Hillary, and it sets up the problem and then asks the student to answer, and it's based upon the questions and answers in that catechism. It's a wonderful exercise at the end, and it really forces the student, at whatever age, to think through what he just learned so that he's able to take that and bring it to people his age in the baseball court, on the swings, in the street. That's what kids were doing before 1965.
How about high school? When would you have them start reading the Summa? Would you wait for college for that, or high school, or would there be other books in between?
There are high school Catholic textbooks that you still can obtain, that I have on my shelf, that you might be well to get for your children when they enter high school, because the high school text began with how do we achieve happiness. First year, second year would be the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. The third year would be it's separated into the doctrines of the Church, and it's done masterfully. If you and parents that you know could find that series, and I could give you the title of it, I'm sure it must be in print somewhere. That's the ideal for boys and girls entering high school. And then, if you would like, I can give you the titles of this college textbook series.
Please teach me.
I'll give you those titles. They were just extraordinary. You will look at them, Gene, and see, you don't have to go to St. Thomas, because these series, both the high school and college, are sifting St. Thomas to you and to the student in a fashion that you could understand him. You never tell even a college student to go directly to St. Thomas. It'll be indigestible. But these series, whose names I'll give you, do that for you.
What are those names?
The names of the will be the typical. I think it's called Our Quest for Happiness, the high school series, 4 volumes, and then there is the college series. It's called the Catholic College Textbook Series. But I can get you the exact publishers
Wow.
and the exact titles, and you advertise them everywhere. And I hope they're still in print. And if they're not in print, you should find someone to reprint them.
That's great.
That's the course you have to follow. It's out there.
Yeah.
You don't have to reinvent the wheel, Gene.
Right.
It's already
Right.
out there.
Right. Thankfully, we have some 2,000 years of tradition that has been mastered over time.
That's
How,
right.
how would you take a look at, would there be any materials post Vatican II that you would expose them to, or like, let's say like the new catechism, would you give that to them in pieces after they've read something, or no?
I think so. Actually, the Catechism of Pope John Paul II is essentially doctrine never changes.
Right.
So when you're looking at the Father Cardinal's Postwar Catechism, or you're looking at these series of high school texts and college texts, it's essentially going to be giving you what is in the Catechism of John Paul II. So it's not that you're saying, well, you're not looking at St. John Paul II's Catechism, and so it must be. And no, no, no. Doctrine never changes. And it's very effectively being communicated in these 2 series that I recommended. And if you'd like to read John Paul II's Catechism, perfectly fine. You're not going to find anything different there. You'll find a slightly different presentation, but it's essentially the same. It has to be the same doctrine.
Right. Would there be certain temperaments of people? I mean, I'm sure the answer would be like that maybe they would need to be introduced to a different style more at first. I mean, eventually everyone has to get clear. Like everyone has to clearly know what the faith teaches, right? But maybe the more flowery presentation, like that to hook someone in, and then okay, hey, now you need to learn the X's and O's. I don't know.
No, I think the first thing has to be meat and potatoes,
Okay.
and then you could build on, souffle and lemon meringue pie later on. But no, if you don't have the meat, if you don't have the staples down,
It's gonna be
and
hard.
that sometimes getting the staples down it involves a tremendous amount of mental discipline, and that's what we need now, because too many of our children in this culture for the past 70 years have had their brains turned to cotton candy. And
Sure.
they're not able to operate in this world as they should because their intellects have been so weakened and have not. The intellect is like a muscle, and if it's not used properly every day, as you well know in your business, it doesn't operate for you. You have to have your intellect operate, and that intellect involves as much discipline as your wrestlers need every day in order to win rounds.
Makes sense. The fundamental, right? The fundamentals don't change. The basics don't change. That makes sense.
Not for the body.
Right. Well, that certainly makes sense. Now, okay. Now, I guess the other thing I think of is now clearly the crisis in the world and the church, watered down catechesis, ambiguous teachings, and then massive confusion. So the crisis, and obviously you've written many times for Crisis magazine, right? At what age and how do you explain this to kids? Because you want them to, of course, love the Catholic faith, and to have a love for Jesus, but you want to preserve their innocence to some extent, or maybe you don't. Or when does that? How do you incorporate that? What's the best way for a parent to do that?
Each parent knows his children better than anyone else, and so they are the ones that are going to have to evaluate when to tell their children about what's going on in this decaying culture. A parent can't always protect them from it because they're going to hear about the decaying culture eventually from their friends. So a parent with all judiciousness, and they're the only ones that can make this judgment, have to begin to introduce their children to these enormities at the right time. I would say, I don't know.
Like, what should we be is there any indicators that we should be looking for? Like, hey, this is an opportunity to say something. You see a mass is celebrated a certain way. Should I point it out to my kid or not? Maybe they're not ready for it. I don't know.
No, I think you're right. Every parent knows their child. I know a dear friend of mine who has 2 young boys, and, well, they have the fortune of being brought to the traditional Mass every week, so they understood what the Mass should be. There are a few occasions when he did bring them to a regular Mass. And those two young boys, perfectly normal boys, afterwards wept
Mm-hmm.
and said, why do they treat our Lord that way? And
Mm-hmm.
that was his opportunity, Gene, to say, well, you understand that there is this Mass, and it doesn't match this Mass, but you have the privilege from God to be able to be at a Mass that really shows him the love and reverence he requires. And we have to be patient with those who don't have the privilege that you have had. That might be an opportunity, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Or
you.
matters of corrupt morality in the culture. A child who is um, uh, well enough of an age that sees a particular, maybe advertisement. Um, a parent would be required to talk about. Again, another parent brought their child to one of these um, large department stores, and there was a whole gay pride thing as they walked in,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously he couldn't protect his young boy from it. He was a bit about 9 and wondered what all this was,
Sure.
and he had to say something about it. So whether he liked it or not, he had to
Right.
explain, and he couldn't take the way out and say, well, they're just not good people. That's not the way to talk. No, yes, little boy, little girl has to be sat down and say, you know, there are some people that depart from the teaching of the church, and it's sad that they do. And this was a portion of that. You saw it. We can't hate them because they don't have the benefit that you did of having a mommy and daddy who teach you the Catholic faith. But you also have to understand why what they're saying is wrong. And these are the reasons. So the child says, Mom and Dad never keep anything away from me. They never have this. If you don't explain it to them, they're going to always be wondering, what must it be? I want to find out about it. It's hidden. It's alluring. You have to take all that sheen away. And you have to say, no, this is what it is. So when they see it again, they'll say, oh, my dad told me this is what it is. And we can't go near it because it's very bad. And we have to say Hail Mary for those people who are trapped in it. See, the truth is their armor, Gene. And only a mom and a dad can give that to them. They can't shield them from it. We can't raise our children in cocoons and hope that the bad people will never have a chance to touch them, because the bad people will. And the only defense that a child has is their loving mother and father who tell them the truth in a charitable way, but tell them the whole truth. Of course, a mom and dad only know how much truth to tell them. But eventually they're going to have to be told the whole truth. Otherwise, they'll say, Mom and Dad never told me about this. And they'll think it was a betrayal.
Makes sense, right? They're going to have to hear from you. It's being sensitive to the kid's personal temperament and where they're at, their age, all these kind of things. But also, hey, we do have to, when they truly are asking and they really are searching, that they are fed, right? The parents who are the first
Right.
catechists of.
And only a parent can evaluate that, Gene. A
Sure.
teacher can't.
And similarly, I think, how do we get them to, we want them to, of course, respect and reverence the priests, the bishops, the Pope. But then, of course, we hear things that are ambiguous. We hear other people say things that aren't Catholic. And then how do we instill in our children that they're still to respect the office, and that, well, these aren't actually the teachings of the faith, and that's not binding on the people, on them, where at the same time they can't pick and choose what they believe. How do we address that even a little bit? I know that's still like that depends on what the kid is, how old is the kid, their temperament, and the parent judgment, of course.
We'll have to say to them, when a priest says something that's flagrantly heretical, I guess the best way to say it to children of a certain age is, Father is confused. And so we ought not to listen to him on this matter. And let's say Hail Mary that his confusion leaves him soon. But as our Lord said, respecting the Pharisees and scribes, they sit in the chair of Moses. We have to tell our children, no, they are priests, and so therefore they bear the indelible character of holy orders, so we should respect them and love them and pray for them all the more when they're confused. And that would go for every level of the priesthood up to the highest level.
Yep.
Simply say,
Uh,
it's a pity that they're confused, and we are never to shape our lives by confusion. We know where the truth lies. It lies in the Catechism. Let's say a prayer for him, that his confusion leave him. I think that's the best approach, because a child will still respect the office, which they have to, as you and I have to, and yet separate themselves from the error. And that's going to have to be done more and more these days, these straitened days, Gene, because men at the highest level of the church's governance are saying things that are flagrantly in opposition to the teaching of the church. More and more we are going to be called upon to say, no, we're not going to listen to that. We respect the office, but there's a certain betrayal of the office here, so we're not going to listen. And we know where the truth is. And I think that has to be put forward in a manner of enough delicacy where what we do achieve is the maintenance of the respect for the office, but not this naivete that I have to listen to whatever is being said, even when it's a lie.
right. No, I think that's great. I think it's tremendously helpful for people because we want, I feel like most people, I feel like people do want to be good Catholics. I mean, we're talking people who are actually in it, but you have that delicate balance. And what do you want to be obedient, but at the same time, you know what the teachings are too. And when you bring it up, like we can raise concerns and raise our opinions in a charitable way for the common good, right? Even canon law says that, but we can't. Then you see other sources where sometimes it's like it's always trying to paint really anyone, whether it's priests, bishops, or the Pope, in the least favorable light possible. And that's when it starts like, well, that's not the way to do it either. And you don't want your kids then to go off the rails into that territory, right? Like you said, I think you said it well with they sit on the chair of Moses, so you respect what they say. But if they're not doing something morally right or teaching something morally incorrect, we don't do it.
We don't do it. We respectfully say no to that because it contradicts what's in the Catechism. Very simple formula, but that's what we have to do increasingly.
Absolutely.
And that's the sign of a faithful Catholic.
Right? Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Father, I think that was awesome. That was a great talk. Where can people find, well, first of all, I guess, if there was anything else you wanted to say, and then two, where can people find you? How do people attend your catechism classes and anything you have coming up?
Well, as Frank has reminded me, I through Frank's good offices, I now have a website which is called fatherperricone.com. That's
We'll have it in the show notes. Yep.
.com. And that will give all the places where I'm lecturing. If anyone is inclined to do any reading of my writing, all of it's done on Crisis Magazine online. And I suppose that would be about it, Frank. Yeah. Of course, I do give lectures around the country. Sometimes they're recorded. If they are, Frank immediately scoops them up and puts them on my website. Most of the time, they're not recorded. So I just gave a lecture down in Tampa, Florida, to a group of 125 men on fire with the faith.
Nice.
And I hope I put further gasoline on that fire. And but that wasn't recorded, so Frank doesn't have it. It's not on my website. But so there is that. I might also want to add that I'm preaching a retreat. I've been preaching retreats now for 49 of my 50 years of priesthood. And this retreat will be held November 15th. Well, you could find details about it on my website. And it really is, I think, a Paris Island for Catholic men. My aim is to make the Marines, Catholic spiritual Marines. And they might come out a bit exhausted after 2 days, but that's my purpose. And So that's November 15th, and that begins on a Friday night, goes to a Sunday afternoon. And we usually have about 120 men, so they might want to. That's November, so they might want to sign up before it gets filled.
Absolutely. Creating the Navy SEALs of Catholics here.
I am. That's exactly what I like to say, the Navy SEALs of Catholic.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Father. If you could close us all with the blessing.
Benedicat omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sancti, descent super vos et maneat semper amen. Holy Mary, our hope, seat of wisdom.
Pray for us.
Thank you, Gene.
Thank you, Father.